Chapter 1: The Serpent and the Sun, A Prophecy of Blood. The air in the northern reaches of Tawantinsuyu, the land of four quarters, hummed with the disciplined energy of an empire at its zenith. It was the year 1527 by the reckoning of the distant, yet unknown Castilians, and Sapa Inca Huayna Capac, son of the sun, ruler of rulers, stood upon a rise overlooking the newly conquered territories near Quito. His gaze, usually as sharp and far-reaching as the condors that circled the Andean peaks, was today veiled with a weariness that even the crisp mountain air could not entirely dispel. Below him, the sprawling camp of his veteran army, a sea of meticulously ordered tents, disciplined warriors, and the vibrant colors of regional banners, testified to the might that had pushed the empire's frontiers further than any of his divine ancestors. The great royal road, the Capac-Nan, stretched southwards from this point like a vital artery, a testament to Inca engineering and administrative genius. Along its paved and graded surface, Chasqui messengers, fleet-footed and relentless, relayed imperial decrees and intelligence across thousands of miles, from the humid northern jungles to the arid southern deserts, from the Pacific coast to the misty highlands. Storehouses or kolkas bulged with grain, textiles and weapons, ensuring the army's sustenance and the empire's stability. All was order, or so it seemed. All was strength. Beside Huayna Capac stood his son Atahualpa, a young man whose dark eyes missed little. Though not yet the designated heir, that honor belonged to Nainan Cuyochi, currently with the imperial court in Tamapampa. Atahualpa had spent years campaigning with his father, absorbing the brutal lessons of warfare and governance in these rebellious northern lands. He was popular with the seasoned generals, men like Quisquis and Chalcachimac, who respected his keen intellect, his martial aptitude, and the quiet intensity that burned within him. Atahualpa watched his father now, noting the slight slump in the Sapa Inca's usually indomitable posture, the way his hand rested a moment too long on the golden sun disk adorning his chest. Further down the slope, Cusi, a veteran warrior from the Chachapoya region, a people once fiercely independent but now integrated into the Inca military machine, adjusted the strap of his shield. He was a sinewy man, his face etched by sun and war, his loyalty to the Sapa Inca absolute. He had fought under Huayna Capac's banner for many seasons, witnessed the expansion of the empire, the swift justice meted out to rebels, and the meticulous order imposed upon conquered peoples through the Mitmac resettlement system. The Sapa Inca was more than a man, he was the divine embodiment of Inti, the sun god, the source of all life and order. To Cusi, the empire was eternal, its foundations as solid as the Andes themselves. Yet, even Cusi had felt a subtle tremor of unease in recent moons. Not from the skirmishes with the still resistant Kara people, those were but the dying embers of a settled conflict, but from whispers carried on the wind, tales from coastal traders of strange sicknesses further north beyond the empire's current reach. And then there were the Amautas, the wise men and high priests of the court, their faces more drawn than usual, their pronouncements during recent divination ceremonies veiled in an uncharacteristic ambiguity. Only a month passed during the Inti Raymi festival, truncated and observed with less pomp here in the field than in sacred Cuzco, and Uma, a high priest accompanying the campaign, had sacrificed a llama. Its entrails, usually a clear map of future fortunes, had been disturbingly mottled, its lungs flecked with an unfamiliar darkness. The priest had spoken of Pachamama, Mother Earth, being disturbed, of a Machu Wanwi, an ancient dying, a pestilence that walked like a shadow, unseen until it struck. He'd also murmured of an ancient prophecy, a Wilka, sacred oracle's utterance, that spoke of giant floating houses arriving from the sunset sea, bearing men with hair on their faces like maize tassels, men who would unleash a serpent of blood that would coil around the heart of the sun. Huayna Capac had dismissed the priest's more dire interpretations with a regal wave of his hand, attributing the omens to the anxieties of a long campaign. The sun watches over his children, he had declared, his voice still resonant with authority. And I am his son. Tawantinsuyu is strong. But the sun, it seemed, could also weep. The first sign was a cough, dry and racking, from a Chasqui runner who had arrived from the coast near Tumbay, his body slick with sweat despite the chill highland air. He had delivered his quipu, the knotted cords that served as the empire's records, and collapsed, his skin already hot to the touch. Within days a strange malady began to spread through the camp like wildfire. It started with a fever that burned like the desert sun at noon, followed by a crippling weariness that left even the strongest warriors prostrate. Then came the rash, angry red pustules that blossomed across the skin, itching and agonizing, transforming men into grotesque parodies of themselves. The Hampi Kamayuk, the Inca healers, were baffled. Their traditional remedies, infusions of quinine bark for fevers, poultices of medicinal herbs, proved useless against this new horror. They called it Hatton, the Great Rash, but some, remembering the priest's words, whispered it was the Machu Wanwi, the Deathwalker. Kusi saw its devastating progress firsthand. Men he had shared jokes and AQHA, maize beer with only days before were reduced to moaning, pustule-covered wretches, their eyes cloudy with delirium. The meticulously ordered camp began to fray at the edges. The sharp calls of training officers were replaced by the low groans of the sick, and the hurried fearful whispers of the healthy. Smoke from funeral pyres, a hasty uncharacteristic departure from traditional Inca burial rites, adopted out of fear of the disease's spread, began to stain the clear Andean sky, carrying the scent of scorched flesh and despair. Atahualpa moved among the afflicted with a surprising calmness, his face a mask of stoic concern. He conferred with his father's generals, Quisquis and Chalcachimac, men whose loyalty he had carefully cultivated. He listened to the reports from the healers, his brow furrowed in thought, while Huayna Capac, secluded in his royal pavilion, fought his own battle against the encroaching sickness. Atahualpa was a visible presence, a young condor testing its wings in the eye of an unexpected storm. He ordered the sick to be isolated, a measure born of pragmatic observation rather than traditional healing practice. He ensured that the kolkas were well guarded, that the uninfected portions of the army maintained discipline. His ambition, though always present, was now tempered by the crucible of crisis, revealing a capacity for leadership that did not go unnoticed by the northern army. The Sapa Inca himself was not spared. Huayna Capac, the conqueror of vast territories, the divine monarch who had seemed as immutable as the mountains, succumbed to the fever. His robust constitution, hardened by years of campaigning, withered under the onslaught of the invisible enemy. The healers, their faces grim, emerged from his pavilion with downcast eyes. The news spread through the camp in hushed, terrified tones. The son of the sun was dying. Panic, kept at bay by discipline and Atahualpa's steadying influence, now threatened to engulf them. If the Sapa Inca, god in human form, could be struck down by this vile pestilence, what hope was there for mortal men? The prophecies of the Amautas returned with chilling force. The serpent of blood seemed to be uncoiling. Inside the royal tent, Huayna Capac, his breath shallow, his skin a patchwork of angry sores, summoned his closest advisers and his son, Atahualpa. His voice, once a thunderous command, was now a mere whisper. He had already designated Unquenchable, his eldest son by his principal wife in Cusco, as his heir. A runner had been dispatched weeks ago to Tumapampa with this decree, but now uncertainty gnawed at him. Rumors had reached him, carried by Chasquis who had themselves fallen sick shortly after arrival, that Unquenchable too was afflicted by the great rash. If Inti calls Unquenchable before me, Huayna Capac rasped, his eyes searching Atahualpa's face, then the mascapaicha, the fringe, it should fall to Huáscar, my son in Cusco. He paused, a flicker of doubt in his fevered gaze. Huáscar was of pure royal blood, but he lacked Atahualpa's experience with the army, his connection to the powerful northern territories. Atahualpa, though born of a secondary wife, a princess from Quito, possessed the loyalty of the empire's finest legions. But if the omens for Huáscar are also unfavorable, Huayna Capac continued, his voice fading, then perhaps you, Atahualpa. His words trailed off, leaving the succession shrouded in a fatal ambiguity. He had ordered sacrifices, divination. The priests were to consult the kalpa, the examination of sacrificed llama lungs, to determine the will of the gods regarding both Unquenchable and Huáscar. Atahualpa listened, his expression unreadable. The weight of his father's dying words, the implication of a potential claim to the imperial fringe, settled upon him. He knew the law. The Sapa Inca chose his successor, and that was typically a son born of the Koya, the principal queen. Huáscar fit that description, but the northern army, his army, knew his worth, and the empire was now teetering on the edge of an abyss. Kusi, standing guard outside the Sapa Inca's pavilion, heard the muffled sounds of grief from within. The Amautas emerged, their faces ashen. One of them, a revered elder named Apukalu, paused near Kusi, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow. "The sun sets, young warrior," Apukalu murmured, his voice barely audible above the keening wind. A message came before the Sapa Inca closed his eyes. "Nainan Kuyochi, he too has walked the path of stars." The great rash claimed him. Kusi felt a cold dread grip his heart. The designated heir was dead. The Sapa Inca was dead, and the last words of Huayna Capac had left the succession hanging by a thread, dependent on omens yet to be read for Huáscar, hundreds of miles away in Cusco. Apukalu looked towards the distant southern peaks, towards Cusco, the navel of the world. "Two suns cannot light the same sky, Kusi. And when the serpent of prophecy uncoils, it demands blood to mark its passage." He shook his head, a tear tracing a path through the dust on his wrinkled cheek. "The time of trial is upon us. The very foundations of Tawantinsuyu tremble." That night, under a sky unavengingly clear, devoid of even the familiar Inca constellations which seemed to have hidden their faces in shame, Huayna Capac, the great king, breathed his last. His body, ravaged by the alien sickness, was to be prepared for its long journey back to Cusco, to rest with his divine ancestors. But his spirit, and the spirit of the empire he had forged, seemed to have already departed, leaving behind a chilling vacuum, a silence pregnant with the coming storm. Atahualpa stood alone for a long moment in the cold Andean night, the campfires of his loyal northern army flickering around him like a constellation of earthbound stars. His father was dead. His designated successor was dead. The priests would consult the omens for Huáscar, but in his heart a different fire was kindling, the fire of ambition, of perceived destiny, fanned by the loyalty of the empire's most formidable military machine. The empire was on the precipice, and Atahualpa, the favored son of the northern campaigns, the warrior prince, would not let it fall without a fight for its soul and for its crown. The serpent of prophecy had indeed uncoiled, and its shadow was falling squarely between two brothers, sons of the now fallen sun god. The world, as Kusi and Atahualpa and all the people of the four quarters knew it, was about to be irrevocably fractured, not just by an internal struggle for the mascapaicha, but by the impending arrival of those other men, the men with hair on their faces, whose floating houses were already, unknowingly, making their way towards the shores of a doomed empire. The age of gods and gold was hurtling towards a brutal, bloody dawn. Chapter 2: The Divided Kingdom. Huáscar